Hey, everybody. Welcome to Away Games, Chicago Cubs podcast. I'm Kevin McCaffrey. I'm usually here with Adam Mamawala. He's not here today. I made him an offer that I feel like I can sleep soundly about, and I offered him nothing. So in true Cubs fashion of this week, I offered Adam nothing, and he chose to take his talents elsewhere. He'll be back later. We're going to have a more, I think, emotionally shouty podcast later this week about all the Cubs we just lost and what that means and the direction going forward. But first, we're going to have, I think, a maybe more reasoned podcast today about the new Cubs that are here with our favorite team. And to be joined, we're joined today by someone who actually can tell us a little bit about these prospects. We have our friend from @Cub Prospects, Bryan Smith. How are you, Bryan?
Good, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
How are you emotionally this week?
You know, I feel like everybody has said to me, like, "Oh, this must be a great time for you. You got all these new guys to analyze." It's, you know, at the end of the day, I'm the same Cubs fan. I'm going to Wrigley, I don't know, 10, 15 times a year. So it's been a lot for me too. And, I would just as assume that, those three guys especially have stayed Cubs a long time. But, I also understand the process, and, I guess what's done is done, and we move on, and we talk about these new guys.
Yeah, it's and that is, I mean, just from reading your stuff in general @Cub Prospects, @Bleacher Nation, and all that, I do appreciate that you're a prospect writer that also enjoys the major league team, because
Right.
I don't think all of them do. Like, I don't think, and I'm not just saying Cubs, but I think in general, like among some prospects writers, I think there can sometimes be a sort of vibe where it's just like only minor leaguers are good and like
Right.
only stack prospects. But I appreciate that, I think your stuff weighs the major league side of things and what's here presently well too. So yeah, I mean, I guess since you started doing this and focusing on Cub prospects, has there ever been a busier few
Oh, no.
days than this?
No, I don't think even close. This is, I mean, and then if you even go back a couple weeks and you throw the draft into it, I mean,
God, yeah.
this farm system's added, I mean, I would have to think about it, but I mean, it has to be close to 10 prospects into their top 30, if not even
Right.
maybe a little more. And so, I mean, it's a ridiculous way to, I mean, the ground under our feet is changing, and we sort of have to reassess where we are. I'm still sort of finding myself trying to think, okay, which of these prospects is on the 40-man roster? Which of these guys is Rule 5 eligible at the end of the year? I mean, it's all so new and still a little confusing. I mean, I even told you before we recorded, just remembering the first names of these guys is difficult at this point.
Yes, and I mean, I definitely, when I saw, I think it was Marquee put up a list of their top 10, and I think they were going off MLB Pipeline for that. The one I saw, I genuinely thought it was like a typo, because it seemed like there was a lot of A names in a row at one
Yep.
point, and I thought it's like, oh, you put the same guy at 6 and 7, but it wasn't. So yeah, how do you want to start to take us through the journey? Should we go through chronologically by trade, or do you want to go by where you have them ranked right now?
Yeah, we can do ranked. I would imagine people probably want to hear the most exciting ones at the front.
Let's do that. Let's count it down with all these
Sure.
new Cubs. So start us off with your Bryan Smith's most exciting new potential future long in the distance Cub.
Yeah, I think there's two that to me are top 10 prospects, and I think the one that I would have in front, probably just because I think you lean position players when you're deciding between prospects that you have ranked closely, is who they got for Javi Baez and Trevor Williams, who's Pete Crow Armstrong, who was a first round pick last year. And I think the cynical Cubs fan is going to say, hey, we didn't draft him last year when we had the chance. We drafted Ed Howard. That right now is not looking great. I think people are, ready to slightly overreact to Ed's struggles in low A. And Pete is also somebody who's out for the year with a shoulder injury. And so there's a route to some cynicism, but I think when you start to look under the hood, you do see some reason for optimism too.
It does seem like across the board, reading the returns here, it's like, oh, two things I noticed these dudes have in common in the returns. One, for the most part, far away from the majors. Like, these aren't trades for prospects, by and large. These aren't trades for guys we're going to see doing anything at the major league level in 2022 or 2023 or probably 2024 in a lot of cases. Also, it felt like everybody's dead. Like everyone we traded for, something horrible happened to them physically, and they're not actually playing baseball, which it seems like Jed is treating as the new market inefficiency. But yeah, I asked my Mets friend of mine, I'm like, what can you tell me about Pete Armstrong? And he was like, well, he had a pretty cool triple in spring training, and then his arm fell off, I think. I don't know. But yeah, he was a guy. I mean, was he drafted back to back with Howard? It was right around the Ed Howard pick, right?
I think he was 19 and Ed was 16, and
Gotcha.
and Garrett Mitchell, the Brewers high prospect, was in between the two of those. And yeah, I mean, Pete, I called a scout to talk about Pete that was sort of familiar with him, and because, you know, there's just no video from this year besides, you know, I think 2 prospect writers who saw him in the minors, and then the triple in spring training to analyze. So I talked to a scout about him, and I think that there's a lot of reason to believe that a lot of teams would have had Pete in the top 10 last year. And I do think the Cubs considered drafting him. I would say that I think he was one of 3 or 4 names the Cubs really gave thought to at that pick and ultimately decided it was Ed. But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, if we go back to the cynicism part of Cubs fans, I think the easy thing is to say, hey, this is Albert Almora 2.0, because you read good defensive center fielder who defends the position even better than his speed would suggest.
Right.
Line drive, contact bat, limited power, and people go to Almora. You know, I think the hope is that he has a higher ceiling, and I think he does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he came from California and was a very hot name going into his senior year of high school, right? He was he
went to that Harvard Westlake program that has produced, I don't know, I mean, mostly pitchers, but I think 5 or 6 pitchers in the majors right now.
Yeah, anytime, I think even like a relatively casual baseball fan, anytime high school becomes famous, it's like, something weird is going on there. Also, it's just like everyone there is famous. Like everyone, like in this case, of fun Pete Armstrong fact that his mom was the mom in Little Big League, I think, right? She's an actress. She's a Hollywood.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, look, I'm busted. You tell me about the prospect stuff. I'll tell you about the showbiz stuff. So this is his mom played the mom in Little Big League. Would have been better if it was Rookie of the Year team wise, I think, but you know, they still did.
I'm moving him up to prospect rankings based on that.
Yeah, exactly. The good bloodline. He'll be good media wise for sure. So Pete Armstrong is your number 1 of the new batch, and like we won't necessarily do this for everyone, but if you're what is the timeline for Pete Armstrong, do you think, and where's the first place Cubs will be able to see him? Cubs fans will be able to see him.
Yeah, I would think that they're going to put him back in. He started this season in low A, and he only got 6 games in before he injured his non-throwing shoulder. And he's going to miss the whole year with labrum surgery. And so I would think that they're going to put him back in low A next year, which is Myrtle Beach. I think that, you know, I've gotten a little pushback on that maybe they would consider going to South Bend with him. I think that'll sort of remain to be seen based on his spring training, and instructs will be really big for him, because I would think that if you have surgery in May, that you could potentially be doing some baseball activities at the time instructs come around. So we'll see. But I mean, the nice thing about Pete, and I think the thing that will help him move a little quicker than most high school bats, is he has a really good feel for hitting the ball hard in different places in the zone. So he's just he's not a guy that's going to strike out a ton relative to his peers. And he can hit the high fastball. He can go down low and get a slider that didn't quite make it into the dirt. And so I think that'll give him a chance to move a little quicker, but, you know, I mean, quicker is still going to mean 2024, 2025.
Yeah, that's a thing where, and I mean, this is a topic we'll probably get into more on another podcast, but like looking across the board at these prospects, it can sort of you wonder how much of a hint it is to like the full direction the Cubs are going next year. Because there's a world, as someone who is like not thrilled about this week overall, like there is a world where I can see all the moves here and the guys Jed was going for, which tended to be some guys who are like possibly higher ceiling, higher risk, further down the line, like reloading the system for guys who are going to be coming to the major league level 5 years from now. That makes a lot of sense if you intend to spend money between now and then to load a major league team with major league players, some of which you know personally from recent experience. But it's interesting because so many of these guys, even the exciting ones, are like, you know, we're not going to see them for a while, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see the path towards competing next year as clear as, you know, I think other people can see. Okay, if we get these 3 free agents, and then, you know, I mean, I think there is some upside with maybe Alzolay and Steele that they could get to competing next year, but it seems like a bunch of things would have to go right. A bunch of free agents would have to agree to take the Cubs offer over other offers, and it just seems like there's too much in the air. So yeah, I mean, I think that 2023 is when you're going to be looking to start to nudge in that direction, and then hopefully a lot of these guys that they've acquired and some of the guys they've developed themselves get there in 2024 and 2025, and then you have the waves of talent that we can joke about moving forward.
Yeah. So who's all right? So we got PCA is at the top of the new list. Who you got next in terms of our new Cub friends?
Yeah, I don't know that this is sort of conventional thinking in the prospect world, but the one to me that jumped out the most is Caleb Killian, who's the pitcher that the Cubs got in the Chris Bryant trade. Caleb, I didn't know much about other than the fact that he has crazy numbers in the minors this year. And I think the thing that I read in my mentions constantly was, hey, this reminds me of Kyle Hendricks when we got him. He was somebody with really good strikeout to walk rates.
Mm-hmm. Walks nobody, respected. Right?
Yeah, I think maybe 8 or 9 this whole year against like 90 strikeouts. And then when I started to look at the tape and sort of confirmed it independently, I mean, there's some real stuff here. And I think the preseason rankings of Caleb, which were more as like a back end of the top 30 of the Giants prospects, I just don't think that really applies anymore. I think he's a completely different pitcher since the pandemic. And I think that when the big national prospect outlets catch up a little bit to what's happened this year, then his rankings is going to really reflect that.
I mean, that's an exciting thing. And I enjoyed reading what you wrote about him in your breakdown at Bleacher Nation. And because it seemed like the initial sort of like snap review of that trade didn't even place him as the higher of the two Giants prospects, right?
Yep. Yeah, I think Canario has sort of that young, exciting power potential that made him get ranked higher. But for me, I think Killian, you know, he's in AA right now.
Oh, that's nice. I didn't realize he was that even that advanced league-wise.
Yeah. And he's throwing 96, he has even topped at 98 a few times routinely. And I think the thing that really jumps out, I mean, he's 6'4", looks, you know, like the pitcher that scouts like pitchers to look like. And he just throws so easy. I mean, that's what jumped out to me when I saw it, is you look at a radar gun right after the pitch and it's like, okay, that doesn't seem like 95. And, you know, is it a hot stadium gun? And no, I mean, he carried it between multiple stadiums. He carried, you know, I think it's confirmed on, you know, the actual sort of TrackMan radar guns. And it's a real sort of easy 96. And I think that was what made me, in my write-up, I kind of compared him to Zach Wheeler, not so much as having that sort of ace potential that Zach, I think, had, but more like, if you look at what he looks like, his build, and just how easy he throws a fastball, that's sort of what reminded me of Zach.
Well, that's an exciting thing. And also it's encouraging in a couple of ways, I think, because first, of the returns for Javi, Rizzo, and Bryant, at first it felt to me like the most disappointing return was the Chris Bryant return, if just immediately off of those three. And then seeing that Killian popping like that, not only is it encouraging because, okay, it's good to have good dudes, but also it's a little encouraging about like just from what the Cubs scouting is doing, if they're finding guys like that. And like, looking at the Yu Darvish trade now, it seems like Owen, is it Casey? Is that how it's pronounced?
Yes.
Owen Casey and Preciado have both popped a little bit too from what it seemed like their rankings were earlier. So that's sort of, for me, surprisingly nice if the Cubs are getting ahead of the curve on some of these guys.
Well, and honestly, I think that I do think that's true, but also just the fact that this was the trade that was put out there by the Giants. I think that the baseball industry evaluated somebody like Caleb Killian inside baseball a lot higher than we do when we see the trade and go look at where these guys are ranked as prospects. It doesn't sort of reflect that the evaluations on these guys are constantly changing. And when they have something, the prospect outlets and the guys like us that write about it, we're going to be much slower to receive that than the teams that actually sort of A, have the data that they get every day, and B, are sending scouts out there all the time. So I think the trade does sort of reflect that these guys are sort of better prospects than seemed on the day that we acquired them.
And when you're doing the research for this, are you mentioned talking to scouts? So that's what's your process exactly? You're reaching out to scouts directly with these teams?
Yeah, it depended on the player. I mean, the less video I had, the more that I wanted to go talk to somebody. I mean, what I prefer is just to do the work myself and then connect with the Cubs people after the fact and sort of see if my eyes were lying to me or anything like that. And so with somebody like Caleb, I think I watched 7 starts of his this year. But with somebody like Pete Crow Armstrong, I didn't have anything. So I had sort of no choice but to just go, get some outside analysis from somebody inside baseball.
Nice. So who's next on our list?
Yeah, who is next on our list?
I mean, someone I'm curious about. We talked about the guys from 2 of the big 3 names that, and I mean, I guess you could count Kimbrel in there too. But from the Rizzo trade, it seems like Fangraphs has Kevin Alcantara now ranked. I think they have him number 2 in the Cubs system, according to what they're saying. So what's your take on Alcantara? And the pitcher in that deal is one of the dudes who I thought was a typo. It's an Alexander, I think. Is that right?
It's an Alexander, Alexander
Yes.
Vizcaino. Yeah, but you're actually right. The guy I have third on the list of Cubs acquisitions is Kevin Alcantara. Now, I would not have him right now as a top 10 prospect in the system. I would have him just outside of it.
Okay.
So 2 is very high, but Fangraphs does a really good job with those complex leagues. And so, I think that the fact that they see the excitement, I think should give people a little more optimism. Kevin is really interesting. He's 6'6", and it doesn't look like that when you see pictures or videos of him because he is so skinny. I mean, it's like, I can't remember the last time I saw somebody who was 6'6" and this skinny. He looks like a basketball player. He does not look like a baseball player.
Right. Yeah. Drafting athletes for intramural league.
Exactly.
Yeah. So he's a 6'6" outfielder, and he's already suited up. I saw in Arizona. I saw a video of him in a Cubs jersey. So I guess that's good. But he's super young too, right? He's a relatively recent international signing.
He's 19. I think he was also in their complex league in Florida in 2019. And he's going to be in Arizona, probably finish the year there, start next year in Myrtle Beach. And I think the Cubs will just mostly work on adding some muscle. He plays center field right now. He moves really well at the plate. I mean, it's really easy how he kind of gets through his swing and really turns. And I think that gives a lot of hope for power potential when you add some muscle, that if you have that sort of, hip movement and hand movement through the zone, then you can get some power that comes from there. And so I think that's really what the Cubs are seeing is, if we can add legitimately 50 pounds of muscle onto this guy, then we have a guy. And they have proof that they can do it because that's who Brennan Davis was.
Yeah, and that makes sense too. Another very tall guy who actually was a basketball player as well. And and I guess I didn't realize how skinny Brennan was when he came up. He's still a lean guy, obviously, but he's added a lot of pounds since he came in.
I believe it's 40. I think it was
Man.
two different off seasons of 20 pounds for Brennan. So yeah, I mean they really do. I mean, they've put a lot of money into their high performance team, and they've hired sort of multiple levels within high performance, where I think before they sort of just had one guy at each level. Now they have somebody who oversees it all, and sort of a whole development process for getting guys to learn how to, lift weights better, how to eat better, and things like that. And so I think they believe that they can get Kevin in and have him put on that muscle, and then that's where you start to feel a ceiling. But it's a ways away. I mean,
I mean, this is 2025 stuff, right? I mean,
yeah. I mean, 2025, and then, I mean, I guess it's just all when that muscle hits, and assuming the athleticism stays when it does. But yeah, I mean, a lot of things have to go right for Kevin to be the player that I think the Cubs want him to be. But I think that the ceiling is there, and it's probably a ceiling. I mean, it might be the ceiling that's the highest of anyone they acquired. It's just he's sort of the furthest away from the ceiling of those guys too, I think.
Right. And thinking about these sort of outlier guys in terms of size and potential future athleticism. I mean, Preciado is another guy who's like a huge shortstop, right? And he's more likely to end up at third, it seems, but that's another guy who is at the time, I think, was billed as the highest upside guy in the Darvish trade, but another sort of outlier, just huge dude, right?
And I think he's somebody who, like, polish wise with the bat, I think he belongs in low A this year, but I think the Cubs were very deliberate to keep him in Arizona with the sole intention of putting on muscle. I think him being there is not a reflection of where his baseball skills are right now. It's a reflection of, we have to spend the time in the weight room. And I think, Alcantara is going to be very similar to that. And so will, by the way, the Cubs second round pick, James Triantos. I would not expect him next year to be in a full season league. I bet he's another one who the Cubs will keep in Arizona and get into the weightlifting program. So that's just something we're going to see the Cubs start to value more and more.
That's interesting. And the other guy in the Yankee deal came over, Vizcaino, is a reliever who is, unlike most of the guys we've talked about, he has to be closer to the major leagues, right? He's an older prospect.
Yeah, I was surprised when I looked him up. I was like, he's old. And he's old. 24.
He's 24 and he's an A-ball, right? Yeah.
So, it's strange. I mean, he hasn't pitched all that much. He's in high A and he's on the 40-man roster. So, there's a certain amount of urgency I would think that the Cubs will have to get him going a little bit. But with the injuries and the potential, I think the Cubs are, almost viewing him as younger than he really is, because he just doesn't have a lot of mileage on that arm.
Mm-hmm. And then we've got, do you have a prospect you want to go to next that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, I mean, we should probably talk about Canario, who was the outfielder.
Yeah. The other one, the Giants deal.
Yeah, and I think there are going to be some outlets that have him in the top 10, and I can see why. He hits the ball really hard. I mean, I'll be interested at the exit velocity numbers the Cubs have at the end of the year, because it would not surprise me if he was both the highest in sort of peak exit velocity and maybe the highest in terms of like number of balls hit over, maybe say 105 miles per hour or something. He's just one of those people who has a knack for when he hits it square, it goes really hard. And he wasn't exactly what I expected, because he has some steals this year and a lot of strikeouts. And so you expect somebody who's just sort of really raw across the board. And he's not. He physically, I think he's actually pretty well developed. I think the Giants have done a good job getting him to that point. And I think the Cubs sort of saw that. And I don't know if you saw yesterday, they put Canario in high A. So they promoted him upon acquiring him. He had been in low A with the Giants. The Cubs took him right to South Bend. He got 2 hits in his debut. And I think the Cubs do see a little bit of polish, even though we're still talking about somebody with like a 35% strikeout rate.
How old is he?
He's 21.
Okay, he's 21. Yeah, that seems exciting just because it seems like such an outlier of a choice for the Cubs as far as an assignment right off the bat. It seems like that's not the like getting him and promoting him. I mean, I can't think of them doing that with any of the other guys they've acquired recently.
Yeah, I was really surprised when I saw him get assigned there and then play that day. And so I think he's probably the quickest in terms of actually getting acquired and then getting into a lineup. And for that to then be a new level, I mean, I think it shows that they do believe that his walk rate, which is really up this year, is something that's sort of real, and that he has developed some more polish. What they just really have to work on him with is sort of getting that bat to be sort of north-south better. He's really good in a certain spot. If he gets his arms extended, he's really good. But when the pitcher changes eye level on him, he can struggle a little bit. So he does a good job of looking for a pitch and sort of getting to his pitch. But when he's behind, he can really struggle. So the Cubs have some work to do, but I don't think it's as much work as you sort of usually see with, sort of 21-year-old high upside player.
It's fun to just hear about anybody hitting the ball hard because of
Yeah.
how many people the Cubs acquired at this deadline that seemed like we heard high contact rate a lot, but the impact of that contact was not necessarily the most exciting thing in some of the cases. Obviously, Nick Madrigal was one of the only, like, the White Sox trade, Kimbrel for Madrigal and Cody Hoyer was really the only thing that was bringing back major league talent. I mean, you would say now, but Madrigal, like many people, is dead until next year. So, like many of these guys, but obviously no one makes more contact almost literally than Nick Madrigal. Great. That's cool. We've got Nico Horner already on the team as a young prospect who also makes a ton of contact. The impact of that contact, not significant thus far. So it's interesting, and for me, definitely like exciting to hear about someone who is going to hit a ball hard and that the Cubs acquired this time. That sounds fun.
Yeah, it's really interesting to put him in contrast to Greg Deichmann, who
Right.
they acquired in the Andrew Chafin trade, who's an outfielder who is 26 years old and in AAA, and we probably see him in the majors this year. And he does a lot of things completely different, I would say, to Canario. And so to see the Cubs sort of change what they're interested in and where they're sort of valuing talent is sort of interesting. But yeah, I guess what you could say is the guys that are close to the major leagues, they wanted contact and they wanted to put that skill first and foremost. And then the guys that are further away, they want that ceiling and the chance to really work with the Justin Stone staff to get the most out of their potential.
And I guess in terms of power bats or potentially power bats, we've also got the guy the Cubs got for Jock Peterson, which feels like a million years ago now after all these trades. But Bryce Ball, what can you tell us about another just big old dude? That's a very, very big man.
Yeah, he's not one that you're going to have to work really hard in the weight room with. He's sort of there. He's a mammoth guy. And yesterday he hit, I think, probably had to be close to 430-foot home run to straightaway center. And yeah,
where's he at assignment wise right now?
He's in high A. He's in South Bend as well. Also somebody who's, striking out too much, and the Cubs are going to have to work on that. But the Cubs really did not have power in this system a year ago. I thought it was the biggest weakness in their farm system. And so especially for somebody like Jock Peterson, who was not particularly impressive to me in a Cubs uniform, to get somebody with even like sort of one very tangible major league skill and not even one that you really have to project, one that's already there, was a home run in my mind.
Totally. And I saw, it's weird because I didn't even see the return for Jake Marisnick when it first happened. And then when I did, it was a weird blast from the past because I was like, oh, I totally forgot this guy existed. But was Anderson Espinoza, he was a top 100 guy a couple years ago, wasn't he?
He was, yeah, right before he got injured for the first time. He was on that track, and it's been a nightmare since. I mean, he did not pitch in a game between He did not pitch in 2017, 2018, 2019, or 2020.
Man, me neither.
Did not pitch since the Cubs won the World Series. It's crazy.
That is insane. But he is throwing now, we're told?
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
He's throwing now. He has not yet, I think 3 innings, I think, is as far as he's gotten. To, I guess, catch everybody up, he had 2 Tommy John surgeries, and it also sounded like they were just the worst timed, where the first one he'd been at extended spring training, got injured there. They waited a little bit and then had the surgery. So he missed sort of 2 years instead of 1. And then he has the other one shortly after coming back, but then that runs right into COVID. And so it's just a nightmare 4 years, I would imagine. But, during that time, the Padres still felt good enough about him to put him on the 40-man roster. And this year he's been up to, I saw 98 in 1 appearance. I don't think 98 is super routine, but he really sits sort of 94, 96 pretty routinely. And he was always a guy who was sort of arm strength over secondaries, and that's still true. But his secondary stuff, I felt like he's one of those guys where in every outing I watch, one of his different secondaries was good and the others weren't great. But you're like, okay, if you put all 4 of those together in 1 appearance, then you really have something.
Right. And that's an exciting thing to know, that there's at least the tools there, that they exist. And I mean, God, what a difference it feels like a massive difference to me just over the last year, seeing that the Cubs can do anything with any pitcher in the system. Yeah. Like now things have flipped so much, where obviously the Cubs it felt like we're good to a point developing hitters, and sometimes that was just drafting really good hitters high. But now I actually do have some faith that they can do something with a pitcher that comes in. And Anderson Espinoza, like, as we say, a guy who's been through all these injuries, and you get for a couple months of Jake Marisnick, who Jake was fun when he was here, but no one was crying about that deal a couple of days ago. That seems like a potentially cool thing, who maybe we could see a little sooner in Chicago than a lot of these other guys.
Yeah, I have to think Espinoza was maybe talked about in the bigger deals that the Cubs discussed with the Padres, like maybe Kimbrel.
Right.
And he was going to be maybe the second or third guy in that trade. And then the Cubs got to the very end of the deadline and were probably like, listen, we can keep Marisnick or we can trade him. We don't really care. We already have talked about this guy, it's this or nothing. And that would be my guess at sort of what happened. And yeah, I mean, the problem with Espinoza is that he's going to run out of options quicker than he's projected to move. And so at some point, the Cubs are going to feel, I would think, a little pressure to make that starter or reliever decision.
Right.
But the good news, I think, is that he could move pretty quickly as a reliever. I think they could put him in Double-A as a reliever right now, and he'd be fine. And so, getting to the majors next year isn't impossible, especially if he uses this offseason to get one of those secondaries to a major league place in the lab.
And staying on pitchers, let's I'll throw 2 at you that I guess are probably ranked towards the back end of what the Cubs have gotten here. But one came over for Tepera, and one came over as also part of the Chafin deal. So we got Bailey Horn came over from the White Sox, and Daniel Palencia from the A's. So what about them?
Yeah, Daniel Palencia, I think I'd probably like better of those 2.
I do too. He seems fun.
Yeah, he's 21 and he's in low A. He's like a sort of a short guy that I don't know. He looked to me physically when you see from the center field camera, kind of like Alzolay, but he's even a little shorter than that. Different kind of pitcher, although Adbert was maybe in a similar place at 21 years old. He's got really good arm speed, can throw the ball mid 90s. I want to say he's even touched 99, although I don't think that he's one of those guys where it's really different from outing to outing. And he's had some real stinkers this year, and then he's looked really good at times. So I mean, I think that sort of fits with who he was acquired for, is that we weren't going to get a great prospect as a second inclusion into a Andrew Chafin trade, but I think they did a nice job to get somebody who who does have some skills. And I think the Cubs are really big on short pitchers now that can get their fastball up in the zone, because we've sort of seen that plays better when you look at the numbers. And he's a guy that I think if they can teach him to get in that upper third a lot, that his fastball is going to really play.
And then I feel like for me, seeing the returns from these deals, the early ones, I both with the Jock deal, with the Chafin deal, I was like, oh, okay, this is better than I thought was going to be coming back for this. And then it sort of went the other way as the deals went on. I feel like where I expected a little more for just based on what the Cubs got in those first couple deals, I expected a little more, certainly for the star guys that the Cubs were giving up, Kimbrel included. And then Tepera, I guess I just didn't realize the industry read was that different between Tepera and Chafin. To me, it seemed like a very big difference.
Yeah.
Return there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that I think with a lot of the trades, I was sort of pleasantly surprised when digging in, and there are things I like about Bailey Horn. I think that he has a really good chance of making it to the majors as a reliever. I think with just what we were seeing over those few days with even sort of okay relievers, they were just better returns. So it was a little surprising, but I think that, the Cubs are seeing a left-handed pitcher who can throw the ball 98 miles an hour, who has this really sort of stiff delivery that I wonder if the Cubs are going to try to sort of get him into his athleticism a little more, because I did hear that that behind the scenes and sort of off the field, he's a really good athlete. It just doesn't look like that on the field. And
I'm a good athlete elsewhere. Really good tagline coming into the Cubs system. I swear to God, dude, I'm great at soccer. So just let me.
I think somebody sent me something that they were like, he can dunk. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, it's great. Go dunk on the Pirates, I guess. I mean,
right.
it's a fun thing. I wish I could dunk. I've dreamt about it, but yeah. But and when you see a guy like you say who seems to have more athleticism than his delivery indicates, it's like, yeah, I can definitely see the angle to the Cubs thinking, okay, we can streamline this or make it better. And then sometimes it's just like, oh, a weird delivery is more of a feature than a bug, right. Where it's like, I think of Kyle Ryan, who basically just, he doesn't throw hard or anything, but he throws from closer to first base than anyone in the world, right. Like just something weird like that. And it did seem like Bailey Horn has a little bit of a funky release there.
Yeah, and I think that, if you look at this as a value proposition, I mean, it doesn't feel maybe in the same realm as some other reliever trades that have happened, but Ryan Tepera signed in February or March.
Yeah.
And so that tells us that the league didn't really see him as good as we saw him last year. And then this trade sort of says the same thing, but also if this is a guy who you get, 3-4 years as an up and down lefty reliever, I mean, that's a pretty good return for 2 months of a pitcher that you signed in February. So
right.
Even value proposition wise, I think that you can justify it. And I think that's what, Jed is going to do a lot of damage control over these next weeks, selling these trades. And I think in each instance, he will have sort of the defense ready. And I think there will be parts of it that are justifiable, that in each trade, he found sort of that right balance in terms of getting skills that could help the Cubs when they're next set up to be successful.
Last specific guy question, and this is not as much of a prospect because he's been the majors, but how should we feel about Nick Madrigal to you? How do you feel about Nick Madrigal? Because he's certainly a guy you have seen and scouted. I'm sure he was a very well-regarded college player, a high pick, but the guy who's closest to the majors in the majors was, until he was hurt. How should we feel about that return for who we were told early on that was going to bring back the biggest return possibly out of anybody at the trade deadline in Kimbrel?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about Nick, and sort of thinking back to when I was thinking about him as a prospect, the biggest sort of intersection we had with that was the year after Nick was drafted. it was so fun to tell Sox fans, hey, Nico Horner's better than Nick Madrigal.
Right.
And that became like a thing for a couple of years. I remember talking to people inside baseball, like, who do you think's better, Nico or Nick? And that was really like my entire experience with Nick Madrigal, was just
right.
thinking about him in context with Nico Horner.
I know. And that for me personally, I'm like, I don't see them both on the field at the same time for a winner. Like, I see value in both these guys. For me, it's like, I think you would say, so I think a lot of people, you think of Madrigal as like crazy contact guy. Also, fun fact, he never walks. He walks at a Javi Baez like rate. I'm not like, career-wise, they're 0.1% difference in, I think it's 4.7 versus 4.8 or something. And it's not as much of a sample for Madrigal, but the guy doesn't walk. He hits for no power. It's not, I mean, he hits for all the contact in the world, and that's fun, but he also doesn't bring you nearly the defense that Nico Horner brings you either.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing about Nico, is I think we really started to feel strongly in the last few months that, okay, this is a Gold Glove second baseman,
right?
But when he's moving to shortstop or center field, you're not just moving sort of up the curve, you're also losing something in the process. And I think that that's going to be true. I mean, Nico going to his right in that shortstop hole is just, to me, it's not likely to be super successful. I don't think he'll come out as a plus shortstop. I mean, maybe the Cubs believe that I'm wrong, and maybe they believe that Nick can find his way to just modestly plus at second base, although even that seems like a stretch. So yeah, defensively, I agree. Like, that to me is the part that I have the biggest problem with. I think offensively, I do believe that you can have a good lineup with two guys with that skill set. I mean, there's 9 guys, and to have 2 guys that are getting to be slightly above league average hitters just a different way, I think that's okay. But yeah, defensively now you're fighting a little more uphill than I would imagine Jed would have wanted to put himself in.
It just feels like the path to Nico having significant value is much harder. Like that, because obviously the diversity of what he brings offensively with the lineup the Cubs have had, that makes a lot of sense. That's desirable. I like contact. That's fun. But all the value comes from that exceptional defense at second. And then when you make his defensive return average, when it's an average thing, I feel like it's a lot harder to get to that value. But I mean, it's also, they could also very much not be done moving pieces. They could just be pieces of value, and there's more trades to come, I guess. But well, cool. Well, Bryan, what's I won't necessarily make you give a grade, although it's, grades can be fun. But how do you feel after, as a Cubs fan and a prospect guy, coming out of what I hope is the biggest sell-off forever, that we'll have to deal with as Cubs fans? How are you feeling? What are you most excited about, or most disappointed about? What's the vibe that we should leave with?
I was texting with Brett Taylor last night, and what we were saying, and I think it's the case, is that I would think that the Cubs, as an overall farm system, we can talk maybe about where they fit in, but in terms of just depth in a farm system, I would have to think the Cubs are top 3 to 5
for depth.
Yeah. And I think that the problem with the Cubs farm system is they don't have a great number 2, number 3, number 4 prospect. They have guys from like 2 to 10 that you believe will become that, but nobody is that right now. And that's what holds them back from being like a for sure top 10 farm system.
Right. You get Brendan Davis and a bunch of hope, basically.
Exactly. But what you do have is if I tell you the number 47 prospect in the Cubs system, it's a guy that I can sell you on as having a major league future very easily. And, I think there's guys all through the system that are going to be like not top 40 prospects that people are going to be like, hey, I really like that guy. I'm a really big believer in, Alfonso Rivas, or, going down to like, maybe Nelson Velasquez, or guys like that that have some upside that just haven't broken through yet, and are also just behind a bunch of really solid names from from sort of 8 to 25.
Cool. Well, that's something that's an improvement. I mean, it's definitely the most, as far as following prospects and minor league baseball stuff goes, this is minor league baseball watching for the Cubs. If you get in an MILB.TV thing, that'll be fun next year.
Yes. That's probably going to be more fun than the major league team, but I think the thing to watch next year will just be who breaks through to be those number 2 and 3 prospects. And then when that starts to happen, there's going to be really easy optimism to have about the farm system and the future. We're just going to have to see, what the plan is for 2022 and 2023, because that's that to me is sort of the hardest part of being the Cubs president right now is trying to figure out what to do, what the right thing to do for the fan base and for the organization is.
Yeah, I'd say, as one of the 5 richest teams in baseball, maybe you pay major leaguers for a couple of years and give that a shot. But whatever, that we'll see what they choose to do. I think it would be neat. But Bryan, where can people find you and read you talking about all these people?
Yeah, I'm going to try to be more active at Bleacher Nation these next 2 months, because I think there's going to be a lot of hunger for minor league content out there, especially while the team is sort of hoping to get down into a better draft pick. And, I think that the next 2 months are going to hurt at the major league level. So we might as well talk as much as we can about what's happening on the farm.
Cool. It's Bryan Smith season.